Chapter 19. After Nico finished his story, there was long silence in the truck's council chambers. Will stared at some faraway place as he absorbed what he had just heard. The truck councillors frowned at one another, as if wondering who would be brave enough to speak first. Nico felt exposed and vulnerable. He had never planned to share what had happened to him after getting dragged to Tartarus. It was simply easier to bury it deep within his mind. And, in fact, there were parts of it he had forgotten, just as Nyx had warned him might happen. Maybe his mind had done that to keep him safe, but as he recounted the story, it all came back in terrifying detail. Maybe that whole PTSD thing had a lot more merit than he'd previously accepted. He reached in his pocket. His trembling fingers touched the coin from Will. Usually, this gave him a reprieve from his grief and pain, if only temporarily. But this time it wasn't enough. When the tears spilled and his body shook, Nico turned to Will and cried into his shoulders. Nico wasn't sure how long they stayed like that. He imagined Will would have held him for an eternity, if that's what he needed. But after his initial burst of sorrow, Nico began to feel self-conscious. Aware of the trucks waiting around the table, he pulled away and wiped his face. Okay, he said. Normal feeling sad. It is what it is. You're allowed to have feelings, Nico, said Will. He was doing that concerned thing again, while he knitted his eyebrows together. What you went through? That was a lot. I have to move past it if we're going to reach Bob. Screech Blink scratched at his powdered wig. So it is Nyx we have sensed. She had begun to stir. But why now? Housemith gave Nico a resentful glaze. We just moved in. His Majesty clicked reproachfully at Housemith. It is not the son of Hades' fault. He has always helped us. Yes, agreed Shriekwipes. And I'm sure he will help us now, with answers. Will he not? The trucks all looked at Nico, their large amphibian eyes full of anxiety. Nico wanted to help, but he feared his suspicions weren't going to make them feel any better. You think it's all connected, Will guessed. Nyx starting to stir, our quest to find Bob? Because that's what all this is leading to, isn't it? You think she's imprisoned him somehow? My question is, why? Nico studied the rough stone table. I'm not sure you're going to like my answer. Please try, said Will. Nico took a deep breath. I think Nyx's whole purpose in life is to shape things into their purest possible form. Personifications of a single negative emotion, or feeling, or state of being. Look at her children, for example. Keres, the god of violent death. Geras, the god of old age. Eris, the god of strife. Nemesis, god of retribution. Aklis, god of misery. Sounds like a real party, Will grumbled. And we met another one earlier. Epialus, god of nightmares. This isn't very comforting, Will said. Epialus said their mother had 10,000 kids. It is a lot, Nico said. There's actually a funny word for what they are. I'm ready, said Will. Give it to me. Cacodemons. He shook his head. Yeah, I wasn't ready for that. Cacodemons aren't all bad, Nico continued. If we had time, I'd introduce you to Karen, who works for my father. Technically, all hellhounds are Nyx's children too, so that would make Mrs. O'Leary one. And I met Aklis in a dream once. Sweet Apollo. That had to be a terrible nightmare. Nico grimaced. Actually, she said she couldn't do anything to me because I was already so full of sorrow. Will frowned at that. So thousands and thousands of cacodemons I barely beat back Apialis with all the power I had, and we're not even in Tartarus yet. If we have to wade through armies of Nyx's children. We may have to face some of them, Nico admitted. Or maybe we'll find some like Nemesis who wants to help us. Will raise his eyebrows. None of this explains why Nyx is so interested in Bob, or in luring you to Tartarus. Or threatening the troglodytes' new neighborhood, said Howell Smith, eliciting a fresh round of screeches, clicks and growls from the other council members. Nico thought about that horrible garden of darkness in Tartarus, that mansion made from insects. The idea of Nyx interfering with the Trog's newfound happiness broke his heart, and made him angry. Nyx is obsessive, he said. I faced her only briefly, and she was downright offended by who I was. Right, said Will. That whole bit about escaping who you are. She's a primordial goddess of night and darkness. There's nothing she despises more than someone who leaves their darkness behind. She doesn't like beings who reject the form they were destined for. Will hit his forehead with his palm. Oh, I get it now. Bob. Bob, who is a former Titan. Nico nodded. A former Titan whose memories were washed away in the Lethe, and who now chooses to be someone different. So, he's basically like evil catnip for Nyx? Nico wanted to laugh at that. Technically, Will was spot on, but a terrible feeling came back to him. The third line of the prophecy ran through his mind. There leave something of equal value behind. If Nyx despised all that was light. Nico? Will put his hand on Nico's shoulder. Nico shook his head. Sorry, it's still a lot to think about. It was a small, white lie, one amid a very real truth. But Nico couldn't vocalize his worst fear. If he broke down in tears again, he was afraid he might never be able to put himself back together. So you think Mr. D was right? Asked Will. The dreams. Bob's cries for help. It's all a trap to lure you back to Tartarus? I don't know, said Nico. Though, if she wants me to reach Tartarus, why would she send Apialis to attack us? Will brewed, which couldn't have been easy while wearing a foam cheese wedge hat. Some sort of test? Screech Blink clicked at Will. Explain, son of Apollo. Trogs do not like tests, especially essay questions. The other council members hissed in agreement. Well, think of it this way, Will said. Nyx believes that everyone is destined to be one thing. Nico, like Bob, has defied that. Apialis was trying to prove that Nico couldn't escape his nightmares. He turned to Nico. That you couldn't even make it to Tartarus before giving into your darkness. And he was almost right, Nico said. If you hadn't been there, Will squeezed his hand. I'll always be here. But if the tests get harder, the deeper we go, I hate that idea a lot. You must face her, said Howell Smith. In her fluffy parka, with a stack of beanies on her head like multicolored pancakes, she didn't look like a typical government official, but she sat forward, her hands laced, and fixed Nico with a stare of absolute authority. Suddenly, Nico understood why she'd been made leader of the council. If you do not, she continued, Nyx will torment you and Bob, the Titan, forever, and any who care about you. Nico understood her meaning. The Trogs were his friends. By moving them into the underworld to protect them, he'd unwittingly put them in the path of Hurricane Nyx. Nico made a fist. I just don't understand why she cares so much about me. I'm one demigod. Trogs don't have eyebrows, but Howell Smith arched the skin where her eyebrows would have been. You are Nico D'Angelo. The other Trogs murmured and nodded. You show new ways through the dark. Clark Jones added. You see the trucks, said Screechblink. You see Bob the Titan. Will smiled and squeezed his hand. Nix hates what you represent. Change. Hal Smith nodded wisely. Or at least the potential of it. Nico was uncomfortable with the way they were looking at him, with trust and pride, like he was someone who deserved a spotlight. Being a son of Hades, he didn't do spotlights. I'll fix this, he promised. I'll save Bob and convince Nix to back off. We will, corrected Will, of the magnificent cheese hat. And hey, if Nix wants your darkness so bad, you can just leave some of it with her. That wouldn't be so bad. Nico knew he was joking, but the comment didn't sit well. Ha ha. You're hilarious. Then it's settled, said Housemouth. We troglodytes will guide you past Aberrus to the far side of the underworld, where you may descend into Tartarus. We will do our best to keep you hidden from Hades and Nyx. Does the council agree? All 5 troglodytes clicked in unison. Housemouth beamed at Nico and Will. Excellent. Now you should rest. A mushroom glow, Screechblink and His Majesty will escort you through the pathways. Mushroom glow? Will asked. It's their dawn, Nico explained. When the mushrooms start glowing. And the pathways? We do not travel out in the open, said Screechwipes. For our own protection, we have found hidden trails. To avoid the attention of Hades' minions, said His Majesty. And a ghost. Ghosts? This is the land of the dead, Will, said Nico. Not all souls make it across the river Styx, or into my father's kingdom. Some get lost, or turn aside for whatever reason. They wander around, as ghosts. They are usually not dangerous, said His Majesty, but they are often sad. It is hard to hear their wails. We want to help them, yet we cannot. We'll turn to Nico. This isn't disturbing to you? All those lost souls? Why would it be? It's just part of how things are. The underworld is my second home, Will. Will shivered. I could never live here. Nico bit back the urge to say, no one asking you to. He took a deep breath and addressed Housemouth. We are thankful for your help, he said, channeling his frustration with Will into gratitude towards the troglodytes. I owe you many rare skins for your troubles. That sent the council into a new frenzy of excitement until Housemouth was able to calm them down. We help you because it is right, son of Hades, she said, not because we expect tasty skins. But we will not refuse tasty skins, added Screechblink. He stood so quickly his tricorn almost fell off. Now come, I will take you to our nap cove, where you may rest with our young ones. Will smiled weakly. Nap time with baby troglodytes? Screechblink nodded. They would cherish the opportunity to share blankies with heroes. The CEO led the way out of the council room, and Nico stayed in the rear, his thoughts simmering. He knew Will meant well. He'd never met anyone as kind and understanding of the world around him. But after less than a day in the underworld, the place was already exposing a part of Will that felt different, more judgmental. Sure, Nico often struggled with how other people saw him, and he'd certainly had to correct Will's perception before. But was it getting worse? Will didn't seem very open to appreciate either Nico's second home or the troglodytes. On the other hand, nothing in Nico's story about his time in Tartarus had made it sound good. Could he really blame Will for thinking everything in the underworld was bad after hearing all that? As they moved through the cavernous main area, it was Will's joke about Nyx taking some of Nico's darkness that bothered Nico the most. If only it were that easy. If only someone could just remove all the dark and scary and sad parts of him. But at the same time, they made up who Nico was. He wouldn't be Nico D'Angelo without his past. But did it make him less appealing to Will? This was so confusing to think about. Nico wished he wasn't so sad all the time, but he also didn't like the idea of giving it up. What was someone like him supposed to do? He was surprised then, as he and Will snuggled up on two bedrolls laid side by side in the truck's nap cove, that sleep came to him quickly. Normally, when his mind was buzzing, he would be up for hours. But not this time. He was too exhausted, and his body desperately needed the rest. He dreamed he waded knee-deep in a sea of shadows. Shapes floated within the darkness, but what were they? They were small, barely coming up to his shins, and they scattered every time Nico took a step. Out of curiosity, he bent down and tried to touch one. A mouth lashed out, full of glowing sharp teeth. Nico yanked his hand back, and the scene before him changed. He found himself standing before a long pit dug into the earth. Some sort of horrible-smelling liquid gurgled at the bottom. Nico pinched his nose. A blue shade began to form out of the noxious gases at the bottom of the pit. Nico knew what was happening. Knew it was just a dream, but that didn't alleviate his sense of dread. The spirit took shape in front of him. Bianca wore her Hunter of Artemis outfit, a glistening silver parka, a bow strung across her shoulder, though she was still illuminated by a ghostly blue glow. "Hello, brother," she said. "You're not my sister," he said bitterly. "Nix, get out of my dream." "You must choose, Nico." Her face was so lovely, so soft, so warm. Gods, he missed her. "Can you tell Will the truth?" she asked. "The truth of who you are?" Nico refused to be part of this. He turned and started walking away, but suddenly Bianca was once again in front of him. "I really hate dream logic," he screamed. "Choose," said Bianca. "Message received." Bianca pulled an arrow from her quiver. "Choose, Nico." "Leave a message at the tone," he snarled. "Beep." She knocked the arrow and threw it back. "It's a dream, Nix," he said. "You can't hurt me here." This time the goddess's bone-chilling voice came out of Bianca's mouth. "You're sure about that, son of Hades?" Bianca's arrow pierced Nico's sternum, and pain exploded through him. He couldn't breathe as he pitched backwards, then point blank, then another, each of them setting Nico's body on fire. "I'll be waiting for you," she cooed. Nico melted into darkness. He woke in a rush. His hand clutched to his chest. His face was damp with sweat. A phantom pain throbbed in his sternum, so sharp that it took a while for his breathing to return to normal. He forced himself to endure it all quietly, since he didn't want to interrupt Wool snoozing next to him. The nap cove was completely empty, just piles of bedrolls and blankets where the young trucks had been sleeping before. As carefully as he could, Nico rose and moved to the entrance so he could feel the cold air that moved through the entire underground system. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He knew that demigod dreams were always worse in the underworld, but Nyx had reached out from Tartarus and actually hurt him. Would her powers increase as they got closer? He looked back at Will, still sleeping peacefully. At least, he hoped Will was free from nightmares. Nico resolved right then not to share his new dream with Will. His boyfriend was a natural caretaker, which was why he was such a great healer. But in this case, what could Will do to help him? Maybe it was time for Nico to help Will for a change. So Nico stood by the entrance, bathed in the dim light from the torches outside, and watched Will sleep. When he finally crawled back into his own bedroll, he remained wide awake. He refused to let Nyx get to him that easily.